Tonight we're going to be looking at the etymology of words. Last time we looked at the Greek language, and we talked about some of the resource tools that are available to you to know the syntax of the language, which is the particular part of speech or how the language is put together. Now we're going to look at word study itself, and the term is etymology, and it of course involves the looking at how words were used. Now you and I know that words that we commonly use, we don't know the background to. I never knew that to be a fan meant to be a fanatic. Did you? It's just we use it so often we don't think about the background. So we've got to be real careful when we study the words of the Bible that we do not let what they used to mean determine what they meant in Jesus' day. What we're looking for is how the term was used in the New Testament times. So we're talking about the first century. Now, there's a lot of good commentators out. Barclay is good on Greek words, but quite often he goes back to the classical meaning of the word, which is hundreds of years before the Koine meaning, and they're not always the same. So etymology is a wonderful area, and I've got many books I want to show you, but first I want to convince you that you can do this without having a PhD in Greek, and you don't need that. What you need is a commitment to want to study the Bible, a desire, a hunger to know what God says. Now, the first thing to do if you're really wanting to know what a passage means is to recognize that all English translations are interpretations. And so the more times you read a passage in different English translations, noting the differences, the more you're going to see what is behind that in the original language, why one changes a sentence up, why one uses different words. When you see that happening, you know you're going to need to do a little more study in that particular verse. If they're all translated the same way, you're going to feel real confident that you don't need to do any more there, okay? Now, I want to talk about translations that are available to you in English. And I hope that all of us have a favorite Bible we write in and we do our devotional reading in, but I hope you have some study Bibles that you use extensively for trying to get back to see what the author was saying to the people of his day. The first one I want to show you is called the New Testament from 26 Translations. It's put out by Zondervan, and it's by Curtis Vaughan, a teacher at Southwestern Seminary in Fort Worth. Now, it's not 26 translations every time, but it is King James in bold print, and then under that, 5 or 6 of the most different translations from the pool of 26. And it really will help you on difficult passages see a little new light just by seeing how different people translate it. This book comes in paperback and is not very expensive. The New Testament for 26 translations. I also want to say to you there are many ancient translations available to you in English. I know you've heard me speak of the Septuagint. Now the Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament done around 250 BC, tradition says, for the library at Alexandria, Egypt. Now the one you can buy, it has Greek, but then it has English on the side. And so you'll be surprised how different this is from your Old Testament. Now, from the Dead Sea Scrolls, we know that the manuscripts behind the Septuagint are one of several families that were available to the early church. Most of the New Testament quotes come from this translation. And you can read it in English, and I think it would be helpful to you. Another translation that you may have heard me speak about is called the Peshitta, or the Syriac translation. It was done around 300 to 400 A.D., and it is in English. It's by a man named Lamsa, and you can buy it, and it's just like any other English Bible you got. And yet it translates very differently in a number of places, and this is a good way of knowing how the early interpreters saw the text, the Peshitta, the Syriac. How many of you have Revised Standard Version? Revised Standard Version? Let me tell you why I like this. There are many places in the New Testament that we're not sure of the manuscript that should be followed. Revised Standard gives you the option in more places than any other translation. If you want to see what is possible, this one usually gives it to you in the text or in the margin. It's a very good study Bible because of that, because it uses so many different manuscripts. If you have anybody in your family who is a Roman Catholic, you'll know that since Vatican Council II, Roman Catholics have been encouraged to read their Bibles personally, which is a kind of a new trend. And this is the latest Roman Catholic translation. It includes the Apocrypha. I think it is an excellent English translation, the New Jerusalem Bible. And if you're looking for another translation that I think is faithful to the text, here's a good one, the New Jerusalem Bible. And then finally, I want to tell you what I think is the best teaching Bible that's available today to an English reader. Now, it is not as beautiful as King James, because that has a literary quality that will never be surpassed as far as the rhyme and the meter and the flow of those beautiful words. But this is the American Revised Edition, 1901. Now, it is so literal to the Greek and Hebrew text that it is not a good reading Bible. You wouldn't want to sit down and read a devotional on this. But if you're looking for a Bible that you can pretty well see what is behind the English text, this is the one to get. And I bought this one. This is a hardback edition for $13. So it would not cost an arm and a leg. You don't need a fancy leather one. You need a study one. So the American Standard Version, in my opinion, is the most literal, and that's what you really want for a study Bible, the most literal. Well, as you begin to read those different translations, you're going to see that words are used differently and so on. And I want to show you an example of what I'm talking about. If you will turn in your Bible, if you have an Old Testament here, to Genesis 2:24, and please put your finger in Deuteronomy 6:4. Genesis 2:24 and Deuteronomy 6:4. Now, in Genesis 2:24, we have the very famous passage that a man shall leave father and mother and cleave unto his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Now, isn't it a little bit unusual to you that the two shall become one? Now, that's mathematically inaccurate, but it's beautiful theology, isn't it? Well, that same form of the Hebrew word one, which obviously allows a plurality, is exactly the form that is in the high holy prayer of Judaism known as the Shema. And that is Israel's affirmation of the oneness of God. Hear, O Israel, the Lord thy God is one Lord, and you shall worship the Lord thy God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. That's the passage. There is a Hebrew word for one that means one and only one, but that is not what's used in that passage. It's that word, it's that form with plurality. And I'll give you one more place that same one is used. Ezekiel 37:17. God says to the prophet, put the two sticks in your hand and let them become one. Now, what doctrine would that word study have a bearing on? The doctrine of the Trinity. For there is a plurality even in the classical passage of monotheism in the Old Testament. But if you don't do some kind of word study behind the English, that will not be available. Now, that I did simply by looking at a concordance, looking at the word one. If you have a Young's concordance, it'll break down the different word forms, and you can look them up and see how they're used, and it's very helpful sometimes. Now, the other one I want you to turn to is, of course, a very famous one, Matthew 16:8. This is where Peter makes his confession of faith at Caesarea Philippi. And he says that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus says, you're right, and flesh and blood didn't tell you that, but God told you that. And you are Peter, and upon this rock I'll build my church. There's been much controversy there. In several English translations, you'll begin to realize that it is impossible to identify Petros, which is nominative, with Petra, which is feminine. They will not relate. And it's obvious to anyone who knows that Jesus wasn't saying, Peter, upon you I'm going to build my church. What he was saying is, upon faith like yours I'll build my church. Because Petros is a detached boulder. Petra is bedrock. Now you say, where'd you get that? From looking at the use of those words in other Greek literature besides the Bible, and how the form is consistent on what they mean. Now that is available to you. It is available to you if you're willing to pay the price of looking into it. And so I'm going to show you the books in just a moment. Okay, let me mention some of these now then. Just for those of you who may happen to be super Greek students, I don't know how many I have here tonight, but if you're a flaming Greek student, I want to mention to you some books that will be very helpful. This is the Kittle's Theological Dictionary of the New Testament. There's one on the Old Testament. If you're looking for more than you can handle, this is it. Okay? It will do how the word was used before the New Testament time, how it was used in the New Testament, how it was used in secular literature outside the New Testament. It'll do everything you want to do in about 8 pages more than that, okay? It is so extensive, most folks don't use it. But if you ever come to a word that you're really having a problem with, go to a library and look it up in here. This will have it. And you say, well, Bob, how do I look up Greek words? I don't speak Greek. Let me remind you about the two books that I told you about last time. If you have an interlinear, which has the English right under the Greek, or right over the Greek, when you look at that form and you know what it means in English, then you can look it up in the analytical lexicon, and it will tell you the part of speech it is, and it will tell you the root, so you can look it up. If you know what the root is, all of these other books I'm going to show you, you can use. And it's not that big a deal. Now, really, when the first time you saw algebra, you choked. So don't be nervous about this. I'm giving you some tools that if you really become concerned on a doctrine or a passage, and you ask 5 preachers and you get 18 different interpretations, you want to look for yourself. Now, when I say these, those of you who have been to seminary are familiar with these, but you may want to see them. This is called Artengingrick. Once you find what the root is, you look it up in here. It'll tell you how it's used in the papyri, which is the garbage dumps of Egypt, how it was used in Jesus' day, and what they meant. And the other one then is Moult and Milligan, the vocabulary of the Greek New Testament, do the very same thing. Now, if you're really interested in doing an in-depth study on any word, say you want to do tetelestai, which is, it is finished, Jesus' last word on the cross. You look it up in here once you find the root. Say you want to do the word redemption, or the word ransom, or the word justification, or the word sanctification. This is the place to go. You're not looking for what people think it means today. You're looking for how the author used it, and these books will do that for you with a little effort, okay? Now, I want to show you a couple more that I think are really exciting for English readers. Now, that's a little more. You've got to know the Greek alphabet, and you've got to know a little bit about Greek to use those. Not a whole lot. Won't take you long. You can buy any Greek grammar book, read through it, and you can use these if you want to, okay? Say you're an English reader and you don't plan on doing all that, okay? There are some books that have been written especially for you who do not have any training in that language. You do not have to be out in the cold. You do not have to be at the mercy of someone else's interpretation. There are some books available for you. Here's one. It's paperback. It's in 2 volumes. I paid $9 for both volumes. It's called Word Studies in the New Testament by Vincent. And what it'll do every word phrase by phrase throughout the entire New Testament. It'll tell you if it's out of order in Greek, what that means. It'll tell you what the root of the word is. It'll tell you how it's used in other places in the Bible. It'll do everything for you. It's very succinct. You can't read it devotionally. But if you're looking for a passage and a word, this is an excellent little tool. Vincent. It's very inexpensive. Okay? Another one that I use quite often, the reason I like this one, this is 6 volumes. That's only 2. This is 6 volumes. This is from the man who is Southern Baptist's best Greek scholar and a renowned Greek scholar in the whole world. A.T. Robertson, taught at Southern Seminary, is dead for several years now. The reason I like this, it'll tell you what the conditional sentences are. Remember how I told you how important those first-class conditional, second-class, third, and fourth are? This will tell you what it is without you knowing. And that's so helpful to know when it's a first-class conditional because it means sense. It'll tell you what the word meant. It'll tell you how it's used in the New Testament. It'll tell you how it's used in the papyri. Now, when you look at these, it's going to be overwhelming to you because there's going to be Latin in here and Greek in here. What I do, I don't know Latin. I just read what I can in English. I don't understand all of it. It's too technical. It's for a linguist. I'm not a linguist. But I read the English and I pick up enough that it's very, very helpful to me. Okay? And this book will give you the root. It'll give you the form. It'll give you the syntax significance. And it'll give you the etymology of the word. 6 volumes. I paid $30 for it about 105 years ago. Now, this is one that many of you have. How many of you have Weiss's 3 volumes, Weiss's Word Pictures in the Greek New Testament? Okay. This is a very common one. The first 2 volumes are books of the Bible. This last one is a series of books on specific words. All the New Testament is not covered. Some of it is. One of the Gospels, most of Paul's letters, some of John. This is the guy who... We get so excited about this, we read too much into it. That's why I really encourage the young people here who are going into the ministry to take Greek at Texas Tech, because they need to see Greek outside the Bible and need to hear someone who's not going to push every verb, every preposition, every particle to its nth degree. This man finds more in here than God and the Holy Spirit ever found, okay? He'll just push it right off the chart and try to say, boy, this is certain. And it's helpful but I have real problems with some of the things he tries to lock down. Okay, you hear what I'm saying? It's helpful. It goes beyond what I think we can really say the language teaches. And those things are available for English readers. This is all English, very little Greek. But what it is an English dictionary of Greek words. It's called Expository Dictionary of the New Testament by Vine. Say you wanted to know what the Greek words for forgiveness are. You look up, just like a dictionary, the word forgiveness, and it'll give you every Greek word used in the New Testament for forgiveness. It'll tell you how it looks. It'll tell you what it means. It'll tell you the difference between them. This is an excellent little volume, and it's all in English. There'll be no problem in you looking at this. Your want to is the big problem in this booger, okay? You just hate to look up every word. But if you look up the major ones, redemption, justification, those kind of things, little by little, you're going to become more and more back in the mindset of the language the Bible was written in, and that is very, very important we do that. This is a little book that's called Synonyms in the New Testament, and it was done by Trench. It's a classic. I don't like it very much. It's hard for me to read. Many folks use it. I wanted to show it to you. Okay, it's very inexpensive. Trench, Synonyms in the New Testament. He will say phileo and agape are really synonymous. The reason that's so important is in John 21, where Jesus says, "Do you phileo me, Peter? Do you love me like a friend?" And, goes all the way through there. Peter gets discouraged because Jesus used that term for him. There are two different words used there for love, agape and phileo. This will tell you the significance of them, if there is any. Sometimes it will say there is none, and we've always tried to make some, okay? It's very helpful. It'll take a little work. Okay, some other books I wanted to show you. Remember I told you if you have a loved one and you want to buy them something that will last, something you can give to your wife or children or your husband that will stay in the family for years and years and years and pass down to your kids and be a blessing to them if they see you use it. I'm not getting any rebate on this, right? I don't work for Zondervan, okay? This is the New Zondervan Pictorial Bible Encyclopedia. Now, it is in 5 volumes. And what it does, it takes it through a series of maps and pictures. It will do in a brief thing what all these other books I'm talking to you do. When I want to do the book, let's say I'm going to study the book of Romans. If you look up Romans in this, it'll give you the background to the book. Who wrote it, why they wrote it, where was it written to, what is the major outline and significance. Okay, say once you get into Romans, you come across the doctrine of justification by faith in Romans chapter 4. And you want to know what justification means. If you look up justification, it will tell you how the word's used in the Old Testament, how it's used in the New Testament, what its theological significance is. This is really helpful. Say you want to know where Bethany is, where Jesus met Mary and Martha. If you look up the word Bethany, it'll give you a map. It'll show you where it is. It'll tell you there's 2 Bethanys, one where John baptized across from Jericho, one close to Jerusalem where Jesus stayed with Mary and Martha. This is really going to be a helpful thing. But let me say again to you, this is about $59 for the whole set now. When I bought it, it was $80. It's gone down because they've got more folks to buy it. If you buy these things and put them on your shelf, they will not do you a lick of good. They must be used. If you're not aggressively into Bible study, don't buy these tools. If you are, use them. Don't set them. I've gone into homes that I've encouraged folks to buy these, and they're on the top shelf with dust on them. That tells me they bought them because they wanted to do it and got away from it. The commitment is to use them. Okay? And so if you don't use them, don't buy them. Because your kids, if they see you use them, they'll use them. Right? Okay. Another one of these same kind of books, smaller scale. This is Baker's Dictionary of Theology. It'll do the same thing for you. The kingdom of God. The concept of heart. What does heart mean to Hebrew people? The term deliverer. The term demiurge. It's a Gnostic term. Demons. Denomination. This is just a book of major nouns or concepts in the Bible so you can get a handle on them real quick. Wouldn't it be good if you were in a passage on demons to see several different sources of what people think the demonic is? And another little one, and if you're like me, when I bought these, money was a factor. It still is. This one is $2.95. It's called a Theological Word Book of the Bible. And it deals with the same thing, major nouns and their usage. And so if you've hit up against something, Redemption, it's good to know that's a slave term. It's a commercial term about letting slaves go free, buying them back. It's real important to know that. So I encourage you, a theological word book of the Bible. Now, I want to do quickly on the Old Testament. It's harder to do Old Testament terms because you don't read Hebrew well, and I certainly don't read Hebrew well. So I've got to have a real basic help. I can't use a real detailed one. This little book has been a tremendous blessing to my life. Synonyms of the Old Testament by Griddlestone. It was done back in the 1920s, I think, or teens. But it is so helpful for me, and it's indexed extensively. Just look at the page after page after page after page of indexes. Now, let me say this to you again. When you buy one of these like this, if you'll take the time to assign this book a code, a red square, a green dot, a purple triangle, a number, I don't care how you do it, but don't put this book on your shelf until you've gone through your study Bible and outside Genesis 1:1, put the mark of this book. And 1:7, 1:14, it'll take you a couple hours. But if you'll do this to the 4 or 5 most helpful books you got, when you're reading through the Bible or studying a passage and you say, well, what does this mean? And you see in the margin you have 5 or 4 books that deal with that, and you know that you can turn to the index and find the page number that's on. It'll help you. Nobody can sit down and read this kind of literature and code it right here. This is resource material. You don't need it till you need it, and when you need it, boy, you need it. And the only way to do that is index it. Be familiar with where it is, how to get to it. How many times I've thought to myself, that's in a red book on the left-hand side of the page about 3 columns down. You ever do that? And you got 10,000 red books. You don't know which it is. You got to do this some way to make these books useful. Okay, because this is not devotional stuff. It really isn't. Another one that I don't like as well, but I use it some, is a Dictionary of Old Testament Words for English Readers by Pink. And this is much like that binds. You look up the English word, and it tells you what the Hebrew words are, and it gives you the passages where they're used that you can understand the sense of them. And so that'll be helpful, I think. Now, I want to move on to show you a couple of places where even the etymology, even knowing how the word is used, won't always help you, because New Testament authors use the same word in different ways. Let me give you an example. Paul, in his use of the term flesh, the Greek word is sarx. Sometimes he says the lust of the flesh, or according to flesh, or on and on. In some passages, the word is exactly the same. There's no difference in the way it's spelled, no difference in the way it's printed. It's the exact same word, but sometimes it means our fallen sin nature. In the first chapter of Romans, those first few verses, you either walk after the flesh or you walk after the spirit. Well, that's not walking after the physical body or walking after the invisible. It's walking after the fallen nature or after the spiritual nature. Now, sometimes Paul will say Jesus came according to the flesh or in human flesh, or in the likeness of human flesh. Now there it just means physical body. But you've got to know how that word is used. This kind of stuff will not help you. You've got to look at the context, and we'll talk about that next week. Okay, context. Another one I want to show you is, if you'll turn to John 3:14, let me give you those ones on flesh real quick. Sin nature, you might want to see Romans 8:3 and 4, and physical body, you might want to see Romans 1:3. Okay? Now let's look at John 3:4. You probably recognize that. It's right before John 3:16. It says, if I be lifted up, I will draw all men unto me. And the context is there, the worship of the serpent in the wilderness. Not the worship, but the lifting up of the serpent. Okay? Now that word lift up, that Greek word, can mean 2 other things, and it does. If you have a reference Bible, and it'll have a little A or a 1 or something where you can see where that same word is used, or a concordance, or one of these books, what you'll find is that very same term in Acts 2:33 means highly exalted. Now in John 3:14, what's it allusion to? If I be lifted up, I'll draw all men unto me. What's it talking about? The crucifixion. Jesus on the cross. But that same word can mean highly exalted. And if you look at Philippians 2:9, the same word is translated glorified. Now, knowing the New Testament as you do, I'm sure you realize that every time Jesus talked about the crucifixion, he always called it his glory. is glorification. And there's a term, the same Greek word, translated different ways. It can mean crucifixion in 3:14, but it means highly exalted in Philippians 2:9. Okay? Now, I want to show you one more that's a real problem, and that is the word rest in the 4th chapter of Hebrews. If you want to turn to Hebrews and write this at the bottom of your page, it'll be helpful next time you go through Hebrews 4. In Hebrews 4, the word rest is used 3 different ways, and if you don't see that, you will get people falling out of grace all over the place. If you don't see the different use of that term, everybody in the Old Testament that followed Moses except Caleb will be in hell. Now, they died in the wilderness out of unbelief, but I believe they were saved and punished for their rebellion. And you have to see that yourself, okay? The 7th day of creation, chapter 4, verses 4, 7, and 10. The promised land, chapter 4, verses 6 through 8. Heaven, chapter 4, verses 11 and 9. So it can be the 7th day of creation, God's Sabbath rest, or it can be the promised land, or it can be heaven. And if you don't see the difference there, those folks who died in the desert are not going to make heaven. What they didn't make is the promised land. They didn't make it in the promised land, but I think they certainly, because they did believe God initially, and later fell into unbelief and griping, but that didn't make them not saved. So I think they're going to be in heaven, but they didn't make the promised land. And so there's a good example of that. Well, I'm out of time tonight. I wonder if there's any comment on this or question you might have. Let me encourage you again. Come look at the books. You're not going to use all that I tell you immediately. I know that. Use a little bit. Try somewhere. Get one book, okay? Start somewhere to become an independent student of the Bible. My greatest hope for you is not that you agree with me. My greatest hope for you is not that you just come every time I preach or speak. My greatest hope is that one day you'll be able to study the Bible for yourself with confidence and articulate your own faith from the Bible. It's a great place to be.